Welcome back to week 3 class. We'll be starting on module 2 this week. You can see here I say there's a lot of stuff in module 2, so I'm splitting it up into 2 weeks so you don't get overwhelmed. This week I want you to go through the Cisco Network Academy up to module 2.5, finish module 2.5. This video here is a supplement to what you're learning in the Network Academy. I'm not going to cover everything that they go over in the Networking Academy just for time's sake. I don't want you to have to do everything twice. I tend to be a little long-winded, and I don't want you to have to spend too much time on it. But if there's something you need extra help on, you don't understand, please let me know, and I'll do another video. We can video conference or whatever need to be done. This week, the only assignments that are due that you need to turn in are the labs within Network Academy. So this isn't one of them, but it looks similar. You'll have on the left-hand side what you're supposed to do. You'll have your code in the top right-hand side. And when you click the play button, it runs your code down here at the bottom in the console. Make sure your screenshot includes all 3 of these so I can see what you're supposed to do, what you did, and the output. Make sure it works. This is kind of a pass-fail course. If a program doesn't work, you hadn't done it right. So it's either 100 or 0, right? Try and get it right. If you have problems, let me know. All right. This week, we are going over quite a few things, and I'll just jump right in here to PyCharm. So last week, the very last thing you did was this print hello world. A few things you need to understand is that this print is a function. It's built into Python, so you don't have to code this function, and it works the same. It's just behind the scenes. This here, inside the parentheses, is what we call an argument. And functions don't have to have an argument, but they can. In this case, this hello world is the argument to the function. So you tell it to print and what to print. And like a math function, you would say, do the math function, and then you would give it numbers as the arguments to perform whatever addition, subtraction, or whatever math you're going to perform on those arguments. When we type text or anything, it can be numbers, it can be special characters, anything contained within the quotations, and they can be single or double. Anything contained within those quotations is a string. And a string is a literal, so it will print it exactly how you type it in there. It doesn't really know what the contents are. Like, it's I guess I think of it like text. So you can put 1, 2, 3 in here, and they're not recognized as numbers. It's still recognized as a string. You can't add anything to this. Put a little asterisk next to it because we'll get to that in a second. So print is a function. They will talk about the escape character, which is this little doohickey right here. Backslash. Not this backslash, but this backslash, the one above the enter key. So it's an escape character, so the thing that comes after the escape character will do something, if that makes sense. And I'll show you what I mean, because the next thing I want to show you is the new line character. So if I type, let's see, apples, I'm going to give this 2 arguments, right? Let's do this. We'll print apples. On the next line, we will print oranges, and we'll see what the output looks like. Run that. You see you got apples and oranges on 2 separate lines because you're calling the print function twice. Instead of doing that, if you want to do a list or you want to do something similar, you can take that oranges, put a comma in here, and you give it's another argument for the print function, but it will print it in a straight line. If you want to print them on new lines, you have to add the escape character and the N for new line after everything you want to appear on a new line. When you print that, it'll print it kind of offset. I don't know where the space comes from. Doesn't make any sense to me. You don't use this too often, so I've never really researched to figure out why it does that. But this is how you get stuff to print on a new line if you're trying to create some text and have it appear in a certain way and you need something on the next line. Use the escape character and the N for new line. There is an end keyword, which you can use as another argument. So here you see that this turned red because that is a keyword that PyCharm recognizes, or Python recognizes as a keyword. And when you, whatever you put in here is going to appear at the end of the print statement, or the end of the print line. Because we have this new line in here, it just prints it on another one because it thinks that's the end. But if we don't do that, we just want to print a sentence. Let's say you're using variables in here. You just want to print a sentence straight out. It'll put that period at the end. So there's your end keyword. Whatever you want to appear at the end of your sentence, you can put in here. You don't have to do that most of the time. If you know what you want to print out, you're just going to put it in one argument, because period, and run that. That's what you're going to do most of the time. But you should know how these work in the event that when you're writing a bigger program, you're taking in input from the user. You need to put it in certain spots. The end may be useful, as well as the separator. So let's go back to this. Apples, oranges. Don't forget your quotes. And between each argument, you have to have a comma. So here, this is the separator, or sep keyword, and it'll put between all of your printed arguments whatever you put in here. You run that, you see apples dash oranges, or you can put in here, these little things, and it'll separate whatever you're printing with this separator. We can go back to, so anything that you put in here in between these things is considered string, except that you can't put that in there, because then it recognizes the very next thing is outside of the string. But let's say you need to separate some stuff. You want to do a file path, right? So like C users. Oh, now it's doing it right. Say my documents. And you want to start working with files. This shouldn't work, but it looks like it's going to. No. Okay, so it doesn't understand what it's doing here. This is unicorn escape, can't decode bytes in position. What you need to do is a separate huyamajiggy. And that huyamajiggy, the escape character, will recognize that the next one should be printed. So you have two in here. This is how you have to do a file path in Python. So you may find, like, if you want to type a quote in there, like you're quoting someone and you want those quotations to appear, you can't just do this. It won't work. But if you put that escape character in there, then it will recognize the next thing after that escape character that you're typing as text. So when you print this, there you got your quotations. Fairly simple. A couple of your labs will be a little bit more, I don't know, difficult, um, but you'll figure out how to use these escape characters effectively. The next one we have is, well, we talk about variables and basic operators. So a variable is something that you designate to hold a value. The variable can be anything. A lot of times you'll see when I do counters, I equals 0, and that's a variable. And I'm not sure if I need that or not. But that will hold, that I represents 0. So if I do print I and run it, it'll give me the 0 because it recognized that I is 0. Or 55 or whatever. Print I, it will print the value of that variable. In some other languages, you have to designate that's a variable. Sometimes you have to designate that it's an integer. But that's not Python. Python's super easy. Well, you can designate it as an integer in Python. So it'll be an integer. But Python's cool enough where we don't often have to do that. Now, if you want to port your code into C using Python, you will have to go through and designate your variables with a specific type. But in Python, this can be a number 1 second. You see how that's designated in blue? It's not a string, but if you put it in quotes, it's no longer a number, it's a string. It still prints the same thing though, it just doesn't recognize it as a number. So your variables, Python recognizes what you're putting in there when you put it in there. J. This is an integer. So this is a string, and this is obviously an integer. You can't combine the two. So like if I wanted to do I plus j, it ain't gonna work. I'm gonna get an error because they're two different types, right? But so these are still two different types. Does that make sense? It's still a string. It could be text. It's not recognized as a number. So I should get the same area. It's saying can only concatenate strings, not integers. And that's because the first one is a string. Okay, so I run it again. I did, didn't I? Yeah, it just didn't look like it changed. So I got the same error. So if let's see. Right now, I is a string, j is an integer, and it says it can only concatenate strings. Concatenate's one of those cool words you'll hear when people want to put two strings together. It just kind of attaches one to the other. It's not actually adding anything, just putting the two together. For instance, this is a sentence. If I can spell. You won't get that error. It'll say this is a sentence. So I'm printing I plus j. This is a sentence. It puts the two together and makes it look like one sentence. But if one of these is a number, let's say they're both numbers, and we want to add them, what we can do is turn j into a string. This is another little function, str with the j argument, that will turn that 55 from an integer into a string. So now we got 255, right? It didn't add them mathematically, it just kind of put them together. Now, instead of doing the j, what happens if we do the 2, the string? Well, instead of using str, we would do int. We want to make it an integer. So if I run that, it should be 57, right? 57, boom. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know. So there's your strings, your integers, a couple different types of what we call literals. So, as I was saying, Um, you can use anything as a variable, except for the keywords. And there's a bunch of those, like end. You don't want to use this as a variable to store a number because that is a keyword. You can. It didn't give me any errors, so it looks like it'll work. But just be careful with the keywords. So let's just say we want John, and he's going to have 5 apples. Sam has 12 apples, and S-U-Z-I-E. I don't know how to spell Susie because it looks good. Has 10 apples. You want to find out how. Well, first let's do. And see how this looks. We'll print the names of the variables, right? No, we're printing the. You're not printing the name. You're printing the value of the variable, right? So you got 5, 10, and 12. But then if you wanted to add them, John plus Sam plus Susie. You run that, you see you get your total number is what I just typed in there, and it adds them all together when you use the plus sign because it recognizes that they're all integers. They can all be used mathematically. And now if one of these was a string and not an integer, you're going to get an error. It's not going to work. I would probably do something like this because I don't like having a ton of print things in a row. It annoys me for some reason. So we're going to concatenate the string that is the mathematical addition of the variables. I hope that's not too confusing. Because they're all integers, all these numbers are integers, when you add them together, it's going to be an integer. And then we want to turn that integer into a string. And then when we hit play or run, you get this nice looking output. So that's that. And you can do this. You can do this with anything. So let's say you want to run a formula against something. So let's say the thing is 5. And we want to know what the thing times 5 is. What do you think is going to happen when I hit the play button? Well, it's going to print thing, which is 5. And then it should have a comma and print the total, which is the thing times 5. It should be 25. And there should be an equals in there. So it should be 5 equals 25, right? Yay. You just assign this variable. You can assign any value to a variable. So if you want to put a formula in here and then apply it to any user input. We hadn't got to user input yet anyway right now, so we're just kind of setting the variable, but generally this will be an input later. We'll do that later. I'm trying not to confuse you. I don't know if I'm doing a good job explaining this, and if I'm not, please let me know. If you have any questions, please let me know. But I think after you watch this video and then you go through the Net Academy, the things will start to click and it makes sense. It's really simple. A variable is just something you assign a value to. And for right now, we're looking at strings and integers or numbers. Later, we'll talk about floats, which are, less than a number. A float usually will have a point after it. I think that'll still work, yeah. So, in this case, I just divided 25 by 2, right? Because 5 times 5 equals 25 divided by 2. You get an odd number. I'm not sure. It converts it automatically because, yeah. So this is a float. Your output is a float. So this total variable is now a float. Python is good enough to where it recognizes what each variable needs to be. In a lot of the other languages, you have to specify that or you get an error. Let's see. It looks like that is about what we cover this week up to 2.5. But get in here and play with that. See if you can do some simple printing. Declare a couple variables. And then see what kind of output you get and what kind of errors you get. Those are probably more important than anything. As a programmer, we hate to see errors, but right now, you need to learn what works and what doesn't. So get in here and type a bunch of stuff and see what happens. That's how you're going to learn the most of anything. I can't see. John A. And we'll do SEP. I wonder if we can do a SEP with a new line. No. What does this? Let's see what happens here. I've never done it. Yeah. So printed John. This is a string variable, and then you see it's going to print each one on a new line because the separator has the escape character and the new line. Learn something new every day. This may seem overly simple to some of you, maybe complicated to others, but this is what we're doing this week. As far as real computing, we're working on formulas. Try not to do something too crazy here. Let's do we know 3 pi is equal to 3.14. I don't even know how to use pi in a thing. I have forgotten all that. I know that we can do trying to think of a good formula, but I don't know. I'm just going off the cuff here. So the formula is going to equal n times 2. N is going to equal whatever number you want it. You can change n to be whatever you want. And I think, yeah, I probably have to declare that first. You see how that went away? That's something that you'll need to look for in your programs. If you're getting an error, maybe a syntax error. See, right now, there's a red line under n, because while formula does equal n times 2, it doesn't know what n is. If I declare, and that's what we do when we're making variables, we're declaring that formula equals n times 2. We're declaring that n equals 5. You notice that that little red mark didn't go away because it's reading down, and it still doesn't know what n is because it's looking up here for n. What is n? This might still run in Python. In other languages, it certainly will not. Let's see what it does. It gives me an error because it says n is not defined. So before the formula variable, it doesn't know what n is. But if I move this right up here, you see that red mark goes away because it now knows that n equals 5. So 5 times 2, formula should be 10. There you go. Simple ways to use variables, strings, do a little math. You've got addition. Should be 7. Subtraction should be 3, right? 3. So you did multiplication and division. That's how you do division right there. And it should turn it, yep, 2.5. It turns it into a float. I think that's good for this week. Go ahead and do the labs. It will reinforce a lot of the things that we've talked about. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.